want to buy that dress," the little girl said. Her dress, stained with ash, provoked both pity and mockery from the staff at the luxury store. The manager was about to drag her to the exit, but no one realized the millionaire client was watching it all in silence, seething with rage. "Let's begin." The afternoon wind blew with a freezing persistence, sweeping dry leaves along the sidewalks of the main avenue in downtown Chicago. But Avery didn't seem to feel the cold after all the effort she had made. She stood motionless like a little statue of hope in front of the immense glass window of the haute couture boutique called the Silk Emporium. Her eyes, large and filled with a determination that did not match her tender age of 10, were fixed on a single thing: a dress the color of ivory with delicate lace on the sleeves, and a skirt that seemed made of clouds. To any other passerby, it was just an expensive item in an elegant display window. But for Avery, that dress was the key to bringing the light back to her grandfather Frank's eyes. Avery remembered perfectly the days when her house didn't feel so empty or so silent. Before the illness, her grandfather was the most respected landscaper in the neighborhood, a man whose hands transformed any patch of earth into a paradise of colors. They lived comfortably, without excessive luxury, but with the security of knowing nothing was lacking. However, diabetes had been a silent and cruel enemy. A small wound on Frank's foot, the result of a scratch from a garden tool, turned into a nightmare that the doctors couldn't stop. The news of the amputation fell upon them like a slab of marble. From that day on, the garden of their own home began to wither, and along with it, her grandfather's spirit. The family's financial situation became precarious. Their savings were drained by hospital stays and medications. Avery, seeing her grandfather sunk in a deep depression, sitting for hours by the window, staring at his now idle hands, decided she couldn't just sit idly by. She remembered how much he loved watching her dance in the school's dance troupe. But that year, she had to drop out of the recital because there was no money for the required costume. Seeing the sadness and guilt on Frank's face when he told her they couldn't afford it was what lit the spark in the little girl's heart. Without saying a word to anyone, Avery began her own mission. Using the hours after school and her weekends, she sought out jobs no one else wanted to do. She showed up at the homes of her wealthiest neighbors, offering to clean the ash residue from their fireplaces now that winter was approaching, or to pull weeds from the back alleys. Her hands, which used to only know the touch of books and ballet slippers, got used to the rough scrape of brick and the softness of soot. Every coin she received, she saved in a small cloth coin purse she hid under her mattress. That afternoon, after finishing cleaning Mrs. Johnson's fireplace, Avery didn't go home to wash up. She had a feeling that today she would finally reach her goal. As she counted the money in the alley, her fingers trembled. 999. That was what she remembered seeing on the tag in the window display. With her face smudged by little specks of coal that had mixed with her sweat since she'd snuck out without her grandfather knowing she was wearing a simple everyday dress, looking a bit old and worn out, she headed straight for the Silk Emporium. When she got to the revolving door, Avery took a deep breath. Her reflection in the glass showed a little girl who looked like she'd stepped right out of a classic tale. Her brown hair was a bit tousled and her hands gave away the hard work of the last few hours, but her eyes were shining with a feverish intensity. She pushed the door open, and the warm, scented air inside greeted her like an unfamiliar caress. The white marble floor reflected the lights from the crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of opulence that would intimidate just about anyone. Marianne, a young shop assistant who was arranging a row of silk scarves, looked up when she heard the door. Her first reaction was complete bewilderment. She watched little Avery walking down the main aisle, with steps that were timid, but determined. Marianne immediately noticed the dark smudges on the girl's cheeks and her coal-stained dress. However, instead of feeling disgusted, she felt a sudden pang of pity. "Hello there, sweetie," Marianne said softly, approaching cautiously. "Are you lost? Are you looking for someone?" Avery shook her head and pointed toward the front window display. "Even though you can only see the back of the mannequin from in here, I'm here for the ivory dress, the one with the lace on the sleeves." "I've saved up all the money," Avery replied, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Marianne stood there in silence for a moment. She knew exactly which dress she was talking about. It was one of the most exclusive pieces in the new seasonal collection. The assistant looked at the girl's dirty hands again, and then at the small fabric coin purse, and a wave of sadness washed over her. She knew it was impossible for someone like her to have scraped together enough money to buy that dress, but she didn't have the heart to crush her dreams. Meanwhile, in a corner near the entrance to the VIP section, sitting on a blue velvet sofa, was Evelyn Dalton. Evelyn was a woman whose mere presence demanded respect. She was wearing a pearl gray tailored suit and holding an art magazine she wasn't really reading. Evelyn had walked into the store right after Avery and had quietly made her way to the VIP section. She silently observed the stark contrast between the filthy coal dust on the girl's skin and the immaculate whiteness of the boutique. It had caught her attention inevitably, so she put her own business aside to see what would happen to the little girl. But what struck her the most was the dignity with which Avery stood there. Avery began to open her coin purse on the polished glass counter. Her dirty fingers left little smudges on the spotless surface. With the utmost care, she started taking out crumpled bills and coins she had sorted by value. "Here's everything," Avery said, a smile lighting up her tired face. "It's $999. I counted it 3 times before I came in. Please, could I wear it out of the store?" Another employee who was arranging clothes on the counters let out a mocking laugh. That girl actually had the nerve to try and buy a dress that he couldn't even afford for his own daughter with his entire paycheck. Seeing someone truly poor who was about to be kicked out gave him a strange satisfaction of superiority. On the other hand, Marianne felt a knot in her throat. She reached out to gently touch the girl's shoulder, but before she could say a single word, the sound of firm, rapid footsteps on the marble announced the arrival of authority. Mr. Oliver, the boutique manager, appeared from behind a velvet curtain. Oliver was a man who boasted about his good taste and the exclusivity of his clientele. To him, the store's image was everything. Upon seeing a little girl with clothes stained by ash and soot, leaving coins on his luxury counter, his face twisted into a grimace of absolute disgust. "But what is this?" Oliver exclaimed, with a voice that cut through the air like a knife. "Marianne, what is this girl doing dirtying the counter? Look at those stains. That glass costs more than all the clothes she's wearing." Avery shrank a little at the shouting, but she didn't remove her hands from the counter. "Sir, I came to buy the dress," the girl tried to explain with a thread of a voice. Oliver let out a dry, humorless laugh, a laugh intended to humiliate rather than amuse. He stepped closer to Avery, invading her space with an expensive perfume that she found suffocating. "You buy," said Oliver, pointing with disdain at the coal stains on her clothes. "Little girl, this is the Silk Emporium, not a flea market. People of your class should know there are places where they simply don't belong. You can't just walk in here smelling of smoke and pretending your pennies are worth anything next to our fabrics." From her seat, Evelyn Dalton closed her magazine with a sharp snap. Her eyes narrowed, fixing on the manager's back. The tension in the store became almost tangible. Marianne tried to intervene, her voice trembling with the fear of losing her job. "Mr. Oliver, the girl has saved up. She says she has the price she saw in the window." "The window price," Oliver roared, turning toward the employee. "Those signs are designed for the boutique's aesthetic. Anyone with a minimum of education would know you misread the tag. The price of that dress is $9,999. The 999 simple units in your purse wouldn't even pay for the lace thread." Avery's world stopped. The shine in her eyes went out instantly, replaced by an expression of horror and confusion. She looked down at her crumpled bills, the very ones that had cost her blisters on her hands and hours of cleaning coal dust in secret from her grandfather. "But I saw the sign. It said 999, she whispered. She felt her chest tightening with anguish. "What you saw was your own ignorance," Oliver sentenced, starting to sweep the coins and bills with his hand toward the edge of the counter as if they were trash. "Now pick up your filth and get out of here before I call security for bothering my customers. Honestly, this place is not for people who earn a living cleaning chimneys." Avery stood there, paralyzed by shame and pain, while the silence of the boutique filled with the sound of her own broken heart beating. Oliver adjusted the gold cufflinks of his shirt with a gesture of arrogant impatience. He took one step closer, enough for Avery to see the contempt gleaming in his eyes, framed perfectly by his arrogance. "Listen to me closely, girl," said Oliver, lowering his voice to a whisper dripping with poison. "There are levels in this world. There are people who buy silk and people who can only dream of looking at it through a window. That sign is a minimalist design for our exclusive clientele. People who can actually afford that dress don't stand here debating the tag. The fact that you thought you could buy something like this with that wad of dirty paper just proves you're not only poor in your pockets, but in your mind too." Avery felt the ground beneath her feet turn unstable. She had been dreaming this whole time. People like her could truly never have a dress like that. She looked at Marianne, searching for a trace of hope, but the young employee had her gaze fixed on her own shoes, gripping a velvet hanger tight. The fear of the manager was a shadow that covered the whole store. Please, sir, begged Avery, and this time the tears broke through her eyelids, cutting clean paths down her soot-stained cheeks. You don't understand. I need this dress. I only need it for a few hours. I'm begging you, let me take it just for this afternoon. I'll care for it like it's a treasure. I'll return it tomorrow, spotless, without a single wrinkle. I can even stay and clean all the windows in your store for free for a year. The girl's plea was a cry from the soul, an act of desperation that would have moved any heart made of flesh and blood. But Oliver wasn't just any man. For him, the boutique was a sanctuary that had to remain free from the contamination of real life. The very idea that a girl stained with soot would touch the delicate fibers of the ivory silk gave him a physical sense of revulsion. Clean my windows, asked Oliver with a tone of fake astonishment. Girl, my cleaners are professionals with uniforms worth more than your house. Do you really think I'd let your filthy hands touch my merchandise on the promise of a loan? This isn't a charity. It is a luxury house. We don't rent dresses to those who can't pay for them. Oliver reached out and, with a sharp motion, swept the rest of Avery's coins off the counter. The sound of metal hitting the marble rang out like a funeral bell. The coins rolled across the floor, hiding under the display cabinets and Persian rugs. Avery threw herself to the floor to get them back, her fingers scraping the ground as she tried to rescue the fruit of her sacrifice. Pick up your trash and get out of here, ordered Oliver, raising his voice so the few clients left in the back of the store would hear his authority. You're scaring away the real clientele. Your presence here is an insult to the elegance we represent. Marianne opened the door. But sir, she's just a child, Marianne dared to say with a trembling whisper without raising her head. I said open the door, shouted Oliver, turning to the employee with a look that promised an immediate firing. Avery, on her knees on the floor, sobbed inconsolably. The pain of the humiliation was stronger than any physical exhaustion she had ever felt cleaning chimneys. It wasn't just about the dress, it was the sensation of being treated like something inferior, like a stain that had to be erased. Oliver, seeing that the girl wasn't moving fast enough, he lost what little patience he had left. He marched up to her and grabbed her arm with unnecessary force, practically lifting her off the ground. Let me go, you're hurting me, Avery screamed, trying to break free from the manager's iron grip that threatened to leave marks on her arm. I'll get you out of here, myself if I have to, Oliver growled, dragging the girl down the central aisle of the store. You'll learn not to set foot in a place where you don't belong again. Your kind needs to learn to look from the outside through the glass. That's the only place you're allowed to dream. Avery's feet dragged across the polished marble. She cried with an anguish that tore through the air, calling out to her grandfather, in her mind begging him for forgiveness, for having failed, for not being able to keep the promise she had made to herself. The store's clients stepped aside, some watching with indifference and others with morbid curiosity, but no one lifted a finger to stop the scene. Near the entrance stood Evelyn Dalton with an elegance that froze time. Her eyes, which had remained like wells of silent wisdom, now shined with a cold, contained fury. The manager, blinded by his own rage, didn't even realize who was standing in front of him until he heard a voice that sounded like thunder in the middle of a sunny afternoon. Is this how the Silk Emporium treats its future customers, Mr. Oliver? Evelyn Dalton asked, standing right in front of the door. Her tone carried a cold, severe authority. Oliver froze. The air seemed to leave his lungs, and his face, which was before flushed with anger, turned white. His hands began to tremble slightly as he tried to recompose his mask of courtesy. Mrs. Dalton, the manager stammered, trying to force a smile that turned out to be a pathetic grimace. I didn't see you there. I was simply taking care of a small problem. This girl, she was causing a disturbance, dirtying the place with soot and demanding free things. I was just protecting the environment for distinguished customers like yourself. Surely you understand that we cannot allow this type of people to ruin the shopping experience for a woman of your class. Evelyn looked Oliver up and down with an expression of absolute disgust, as if she were looking at a particularly nasty insect. Then she lowered her gaze to Avery. She saw the dirty face, the tears that wouldn't stop flowing, and the small coin purse the girl was still clutching against her chest with white knuckles. What I understand, Mr. Oliver, said Evelyn with a calm that was far more terrifying than any scream, is that you haven't the slightest idea what the word class means, and much less do you have any idea what the real value of things is. Avery looked up, meeting the old woman's eyes. For a moment, the noise of the world disappeared. In the midst of her tragedy, the girl found a gaze that didn't judge her for the soot on her hands, but seemed to see directly the sacrifice beating in her heart. "It's not what it looks like, Mrs. Dalton. Please let me explain." Oliver stammered, taking a step back as his hands released the girl as delicately as possible, his strength failing him. This girl entered inappropriately. "You are our most valuable client, and my only goal was to ensure your stay at our boutique was pleasant without distractions from this type of indigence." And Evelyn approached him with a terrifying slowness. Every click of her heels against the marble sounded like a verdict. She stopped just inches from Oliver, who seemed to have shrunk under her steely gaze. "Indigence?" asked Evelyn, arching an eyebrow with icy elegance. "The only thing I see here lacking value is your judgment, Mr. Oliver. I've been watching since this little one walked through that door. I saw the dignity with which she placed her money on the counter, and I saw the baseness with which you tried to trample her spirit." Evelyn took a sleek designer phone from her purse and dialed a number. The silence in the store was so absolute that one could hear the ragged breathing of Avery, who was wiping her tears with her hands, confused by the turn the situation was taking. "Arthur," said Evelyn into the phone, keeping her eyes fixed on Oliver's. "I'm at the Michigan Avenue boutique. Yes, I've seen the manager offend and humiliate a person. If you don't want me to make this public and lose me as a client forever, make an immediate payroll adjustment. The manager, a certain Oliver, from this moment on his salary will be reduced to the base level of a janitor. If he doesn't like it, he can leave right now without severance, and we will warn any other stores where he applies about this man's cruel and insensitive personality." Oliver felt his legs give way. The pallor of his face was now almost cadaverous. The man who bragged about his $1,000 suits and dinners at luxury restaurants had just watched his world of appearances crumble with a phone call. "And one more thing, Arthur," added Evelyn with a bitter smile. "Make sure he learns to use a mop. He seems to have an obsession with cleaning the glass. Let's give him the chance to do it himself." Evelyn put the phone away and pointed at Avery. "Now apologize to this child and do it on your knees. Perhaps you think you're superior looking at her from above. So bow down so you know what it feels like to look from below." Oliver, humiliated and trembling under the gaze of the other clients and store employees, slowly let himself drop. His knees hit the marble he had taken such care to protect. "I'm sorry. Forgive me, little one," whispered Oliver, not daring to look up. Avery looked at the man who moments before had dragged her as if she were trash. She felt no joy in his fall nor any grudge. "I forgive you, sir," said Avery with a soft but firm voice. Her dignity had been returned to her, but she still felt a deep sadness. The words weren't going to make the dress cost less. Evelyn sighed and approached the girl, placing a protective hand on her back. Oliver stood up clumsily and retreated to the back of the store with his head down, now transformed into a shadow of what he used to be. Evelyn led Avery toward one of the velvet sofas, ignoring the curious stares from everyone else in the boutique. "Listen to me, little one," said Evelyn, softening her tone. "That man is a fool, but he's right about one thing. The price of that dress is outrageous. But tell me, why do you care so much about a piece of silk? You're too young to worry about brands or impressing people who aren't worth it. True beauty isn't bought in a boutique. It's worn in the way you treat others. You don't need luxuries to be special, so stop crying. It's not worth it." Avery lifted her head and looked the grand lady right in the eyes. Despite the difference in age and wealth, in that moment, they were simply two souls trying to understand each other. "It's not because of that, ma'am," Avery replied, clutching her coin purse against her chest. "I don't want the dress so people look at me in the street. I don't want to impress anyone at a party. I just want my grandfather Frank to be happy again. He was the strongest, most cheerful landscaper in the world. But ever since they amputated his foot and he struggled to work, he doesn't smile anymore. There was a dance recital at school and I couldn't participate because we didn't have money for the costume. And I know he feels guilty about that. He thinks his sickness ruined our lives. I've seen him cry when he thinks I'm not looking. Sometimes he weeps because he thinks he's making me unhappy by not being able to give me what other girls can buy easily." Evelyn felt a sharp pang in her chest as she listened to her. "I just wanted to buy the most beautiful dress that existed," Avery continued, her voice cracking, "to wear it at home and dance for him. I want him to see that I'm still happy, that I don't care about not dancing with the others. I want him to see me twirling in a beautiful dress and forget about our problems for a moment. My parents traveled abroad when I was 2 years old. They said that they were going to earn lots of money and then we would all go. But a long time ago, I heard my relatives say that they split up and now have other families. They send money every now and then, but they've never come to see me, not even once. If it weren't for the photos, I wouldn't know what their faces look like because I don't have any memories with them. My only family is my grandfather. He's my dad, my friend, he's everything to me. I hate seeing him worried, suffering, and sad. I just want him to see that even if things aren't going very well, we can be happy. That he's not alone, that we're in this together. That dress was the prettiest one I had ever seen. Walking by every day, coming home from school, I'd see it. And imagine how beautiful it would look when I danced in it. But now I know I'll never be able to afford it. All my work cleaning chimneys isn't enough to buy even a sleeve of that dress. Evelyn fell silent, processing the little girl's words. She had spent years surrounded by people asking for favors, seeking her money or her influence, but no one had ever shown her such crystal clear purity of purpose. The loneliness of her own mansion with her children living far away and calling only on birthdays filled her mind. She had millions, but she had no one who wanted to dance for her just out of love. You clean chimneys to pay for a ball gown for your grandfather? Asked Evelyn, moved beyond words. And gardens, Avery added with pride. I try to make the neighbors' flowers look as pretty as the ones my grandfather used to plant. Evelyn made a decision in that instant, stood up, and looked at Marianne, who was still waiting for instructions. Marianne, get the ivory dress ready and add all the necessary accessories, the hair ribbons, and the matching slippers. Avery's eyes went wide, but Evelyn stopped her before she could speak. It's not a gift, little one, it's a trade, Evelyn said with a knowing sparkle in her eyes. You say you don't have enough money, but I believe your dance is worth much more than any figure Arthur could put on a price tag. If you'll let me help you with this, I ask for just one thing in return. What thing? Asked Avery with hope lighting up her face again. Take me to your home, replied Evelyn. Invite me for afternoon tea with your grandfather and let me be the audience for that dance. I want to see with my own eyes that dance you've planned so much in your mind. Avery smiled, a smile so wide and sincere that it seemed to light up the boutique. Of course, exclaimed the little girl. My grandpa makes the best peppermint tea in the world, and even though our house is small, it's always clean, and there's room for one more friend. Evelyn nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that she didn't remember feeling in years. While Marianne wrapped the dress with almost sacred reverence, the millionaire understood that this afternoon she wasn't going to buy a garment, but was going to attend the most valuable show of her life. Avery took the box, which seemed bigger than she was, and with a light step, despite her tiredness, guided the grand lady toward the exit. Evelyn Dalton's luxury car, a black vehicle, with tinted windows, moved slowly through the streets of the neighborhood where Avery lived. The further it got from the luxury commercial zone, the more she felt the air becoming real, less filtered by air conditioning and artificiality. A quiet suburban neighborhood in the outskirts of Chicago. It wasn't the luxury Evelyn was used to seeing. There were facades painted with care and small gardens fighting to stay green under the afternoon sun. Evelyn watched out the window, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. It had been years since she visited a home that wasn't guarded by security guards or decorated by renowned interior designers. It's here, Mrs. Evelyn, said Avery, pointing with enthusiasm to a small cream-colored house with a perfectly varnished wooden door. The girl got out of the car hugging the dress box as if it were the most sacred object on the planet. Evelyn followed her, adjusting her silk coat and feeling how the aroma of freshly baked apple pie and blooming lilacs from the neighbors wrapped around her. Upon entering the home, the millionaire paused for a moment on the threshold. The house was small, yes, but it radiated a warmth that her own 20-room mansion had lost decades ago. The hardwood floor shone with cleanliness, and the walls were adorned with family photos and simple frames containing childish drawings. There were no luxuries, but every object seemed to be placed with loving intention. In the center of the living room, sitting in an armchair near the window with a wooden cane resting nearby, was Grandpa Frank. He was wearing a plaid shirt and trousers. Only if you looked closely could you tell he was missing a foot. His upright posture revealed the discipline of a man who'd spent his whole life working the land, though his eyes, a deep brown, held a shadow of melancholy that he just couldn't hide. When he saw his granddaughter walk in with a woman who radiated authority and elegance, Frank tried to stand up, but his hands trembled slightly on the armrests. "Grandpa?" Avery cried out, running over to plant a kiss on his cheek. "Look, I brought a friend. This is Mrs. Evelyn. She really helped me out today." Frank looked at the visitor with a mix of surprise and courtesy. Despite his physical condition, his voice still held a dignified and steady resonance. "Welcome to our humble home, ma'am," Frank said, gesturing toward a nearby chair. Forgive me for not standing to greet you properly, but my legs just don't obey me like they used to. Evelyn walked over, and to Avery's surprise, she took the old man's calloused hand in hers with unusual gentleness. Please don't apologize, Grandpa Frank, Evelyn replied with a sincere smile. It's an honor for me to be here. Your granddaughter has told me so much about you and your wonderful peppermint tea. Are you a teacher at her school? He asked, looking confused. Not exactly. I met your granddaughter by chance when she was having a bit of trouble. You're very lucky to have such an adorable granddaughter. She has a surprise. What has she been planning for you? I told her I'd help on the condition that she let me see it. That's right, said Avery with a beaming smile, and she disappeared down the hall toward her room. Don't move, she shouted from the back. I'm getting ready for the surprise. And as the sound of the girl's quick footsteps faded, Evelyn and Frank were left alone in the living room. The silence was filled by the gentle whistle of a teapot in the kitchen. Frank stood up with the help of his cane. Just give me a moment. I'll go get the teacups. Can I help you with anything? Evelyn asked, feeling uncomfortable being served by someone who struggled to move. Frank noticed and smiled. Don't worry, I'm pretty much used to it. But if you wouldn't mind, you can bring the homemade cookies and jam sitting over there, he said, pointing to a kitchen shelf. Evelyn stood up. They quickly set everything on the table and sat down. Frank sighed, looking out the window where the sun was beginning to paint the sky orange. She's been working behind my back, hasn't she? The grandfather asked, his voice cracking with sadness. I've seen her hands dirty with coal and her scraped knees. I suspected she wasn't staying at school to study with her friends like she claimed. It seems like today, in all her excitement, she forgot to change her clothes before coming home. Evelyn just looked down, unable to answer. She must be doing this because she's missing school supplies. But she wouldn't tell me. She understands our situation. It breaks my heart knowing a girl her age has to carry the worries of a useless old man. Evelyn looked at him intently, feeling a pang of empathy. That's not true, Grandpa Frank. She's not doing it out of obligation. She's doing it out of love, Evelyn said. And let me tell you, a man who has raised a granddaughter with that level of loyalty and character is a man who has succeeded in what truly matters. She doesn't see a useless old man. She sees her hero. Before Frank could even reply, the bedroom door opened slowly. Time seemed to stand still. Avery stepped out into the center of the room, wearing the ivory silk she had dreamed of for so long. The dress fit her perfectly. The lace highlighted her skin now clean, and the movement of the skirt accompanied her every step with an almost angelic flow. She had styled her hair with care, placing a matching ribbon in her brown locks. She was no longer the soot-stained girl that Mr. Oliver had looked down on. She was the very picture of purity and talent. Frank was left breathless. His eyes filled with tears instantly, and his lips trembled, unable to get a word out. Avery positioned herself in the center of the room, curtsied solemnly toward her grandfather, and on her little radio she put on the track she had prepared. The melody played, and she began to dance. With the harmonious sound of the music and the girl's delicate movements, the atmosphere felt as if a fairy were dancing in front of them with a warm magic that filled the heart. She began to spin her arms, tracing arcs of infinite grace in the air. Every movement told the story of his sacrifice. Every leap represented the freedom she wanted to give back to her grandpa. She danced with a technique that betrayed hours of solitary practice. But above all, she danced with her soul. Evelyn watched the scene, and suddenly she felt something break inside her chest. She saw Frank crying in silence, his face lit up by a joy that seemed to erase every problem. She saw love, purer than anything she had ever witnessed. A connection that didn't depend on inheritances or contracts or social conveniences. Suddenly, a painful memory assaulted the millionaire's mind. She remembered her immense dining table always set for 12 people, but where she always ate dinner alone. She remembered the 5-minute calls from her children in New York or Los Angeles. Always rushed, always focused on bank transfers or complaints about their own luxurious lives. Her grandchildren even less. She'd only seen them a handful of times, and they always seemed bored when they spoke to her. She couldn't imagine anyone worrying about her, let alone someone willing to dance just to see her smile. Evelyn's smile turned a little bitter, and tears began to cover her eyes, but it was a genuine smile. She was happy for them. The dance ended. Avery ended in a final kneeling pose, head bowed before her grandfather. Frank extended his arms, and the girl threw herself into them, sobbing with happiness. "Thank you, my child. Thank you," the grandfather whispered, caressing her hair. "You are the most beautiful thing my eyes have ever seen." Evelyn brought a silk handkerchief to her eyes, unable to contain her own emotion. She felt small in the face of the immensity of that moment. Mrs. Evelyn, did you like it? Avery asked, pulling away from her grandfather with flushed cheeks. Evelyn nodded, trying to regain her composure, though her voice betrayed her sounding broken. It was the most beautiful show I have attended in all my life, Avery, said the lady. And I've been to the best theaters in the world, but none had the light you just lit in this room. Frank looked at Evelyn and noticed the loneliness hiding behind her jewels and aristocratic bearing. A man who has spent his life caring for plants knows how to recognize when a root is dry from lack of water. You're crying too, ma'am, said Frank softly. Is there something hurting you enough to dim the joy of this dance? Evelyn lowered her head, letting her mask of a powerful woman slip for the first time in years. I have all the money a person could wish for Grandpa Frank, confessed Evelyn. But I would trade every penny in my bank accounts to have just a single minute of the love you two share. My children left a long time ago. To them, I'm just a name in a will. I'm surrounded by luxury, but my house is so cold that sometimes I feel like my heart is going to freeze. Avery walked over to the millionaire and took her hand, the same hand she had held firmly in the boutique earlier. You don't have to be alone, Mrs. Evelyn, said the girl with a maturity that moved everyone present. My grandpa always says that family isn't just about sharing the same blood, but about who decides to take care of each other. You helped me get this dress, you stood up for me, and you were very kind to me. If you want, you can come visit us every day. I can make you tea, and my grandpa can tell you stories about when the city parks were the most beautiful in the Midwest. We'll invite you to the most delicious barbecues we cook. Frank nodded with a kind smile, backing up his granddaughter's invitation. Our table is small, but there's always an extra plate for a good friend, added the old man. Evelyn looked at both of them, feeling that the emptiness that had haunted her for so long was beginning to fill with something much more solid than gold. In that small apartment, surrounded by simplicity, the richest woman in the city had just found the treasure she couldn't buy in any luxury store. A sense of belonging. Thank you so much, whispered Evelyn, a tear of gratitude rolling down her cheek. It would be a pleasure for me to have friends as precious as you two. After that, they all sat down to share tea time with food and laughter. The conversation was pleasant. It felt like family. It has been a wonderful afternoon, said Evelyn. It's been a long time since I enjoyed a conversation so much. Thank you, Grandpa Frank. And thank you, little Avery. Frank smiled shyly, scratching the back of his neck with hands marked by hard work. You honor us with your visit, ma'am. It's not every day a lady of your standing sits at a table as humble as ours. By the way, forgive my curiosity, but you said your name is Evelyn Dalton. Are you by chance related to the Daltons who run the tech conglomerate in Silicon Valley? Evelyn nodded slowly, setting her cup on the wooden table. That is me, Grandpa Frank. I'm the CEO of the group, although today I'd prefer to just be Evelyn Avery's friend. Frank's face changed completely. The pallor of surprise washed over his features, and his eyes widened with a mix of astonishment and a sudden pang of shame. Avery noticed how her grandpa tensed up and how his hands began to fidget with the edge of the blanket covering his legs. Good heavens, exclaimed Frank, trying to straighten himself up in his armchair. Mrs. Dalton, I've read your name in the newspaper headlines for years. I've seen your photos in the financial sections and the philanthropy pages, and I dragged you into this tiny little place. I invited you for herbal tea from my own garden and dumped my problems on you. What a shame. How disrespectful to have inconvenienced you like this. Avery looked at her grandfather with concern, not fully understanding why Mrs. Evelyn's identity was causing such a fuss. To her, Evelyn was just the woman who had stood up for her and been moved by her dancing. Grandpa, what's wrong? Mrs. Evelyn is nice, the little girl whispered, stepping closer to him. Avery, sweetheart, you don't understand, Frank replied, his voice breaking. We are standing before one of the most influential people in the country. We should have served her much better with fine things, not these chipped cups. I feel so ashamed to have brought her here to see our poverty. Evelyn stood up and knelt right in front of Frank's armchair, completely ignoring that her designer dress was touching the floor. She took the old man's hands and forced him to look her in the eye. Her gaze was deep and filled with a sincerity that disarmed any prejudice. Grandpa Frank, listen to me closely, said Evelyn firmly. Don't you dare feel ashamed. In my mansion, I have silver cutlery and dishes worth a fortune. But dining there is like eating in a cold, empty museum. Here in this living room, I have found the warmth that money simply cannot buy. I've seen a dance that restored my faith in human kindness, and I've had tea that tastes like home. I wouldn't hesitate for a second to trade every figure in my bank account to have the company and love that you two share. Meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Please don't treat me like some powerful stranger. Treat me like the friend you mentioned earlier that I could be." Frank was left speechless, tears welling up in his eyes again. The humility of this powerful woman was a direct hit to his wounded pride. Little by little, the tension in his shoulders vanished, and a smile of relief crossed his face. "You are a great woman, Mrs. Evelyn," Frank managed to say. A real woman. From that day on, the lives of the three of them changed forever. But not in the way the world would expect. Evelyn didn't just sign a check and walk away. She kept her promise to return. She would show up 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes with books for Avery, other times just wanting to chat. But her intervention went much further than that. Evelyn mobilized the best specialists in the country to evaluate Frank's condition. Thanks to her influence and resources, the grandfather received a state-of-the-art prosthesis and began an intensive rehabilitation program. The man who used to sink into despair trying to figure out how to make ends meet in his condition was now practicing his first steps in the hallway, motivated by the laughter of his granddaughter, who was waiting for him at the end of the path. Evelyn discovered that her immense mansion surrounded by acres of gardens, neglected from a lack of passion, needed a soul. One day, while they were walking through the neighborhood, she made Frank a proposal that gave him back his professional dignity. "Grandpa Frank, my gardens are dying because nobody loves them," Evelyn told him. "I need someone who knows how to speak to the earth. Someone who understands that a plant needs more than just water to bloom. I want you to be the manager of my gardens. You'll have a team working under you, but you will be the heart of the design. You'll live with me in a wing of the mansion that's already been remodeled to be fully accessible. Avery will have space to dance in marble halls, and I'll have my peppermint tea every afternoon." Frank accepted on one condition: that he could keep working with his own hands for as long as his strength allowed him to. He didn't want to be just an ornament in a mansion. He wanted to be useful. And so it was. Months passed, and the transformation was total. Frank regained his strength and his purpose, walking with a confidence no one thought he would ever have again. Avery grew up surrounded by love and opportunities, attending the city's best dance school, but never forgetting that her most important dance would always be the one she performed for her chosen family. As for Mr. Oliver, poetic justice was served without mercy. He went from being the arrogant manager to being the guy in charge of deep cleaning the boutique's windows. Every time a child in simple clothes passed by on the sidewalk, Oliver lowered his head, remembering that his arrogance had cost him everything. Marianne, on the other hand, was promoted to manager for her empathy and good judgment, transforming the Silk Emporium into a place where elegance and humanity walked hand in hand. One spring afternoon in the immense and now flourishing gardens of the Dalton Mansion, the air was heavy with the perfume of thousands of roses and the song of birds that had returned to populate the trees. Beneath a white wooden pergola wrapped in vines, Evelyn and Frank sat together, sharing a porcelain pot, drinking the same peppermint tea as always. Avery, dressed in a simple but beautiful dance outfit, began to dance on the emerald green grass. Her feet moved with absolute grace, leaping between the shadows and the light filtering through the oak branches. Evelyn looked at Frank and then at the girl, feeling that her heart was finally at peace. She was no longer alone. Her children were still far away, trapped in their own ambition, but she had found something more valuable: the family you choose out of love, not blood. "Look at how she dances, Evelyn," Frank whispered with pride. "She looks like she's flying." "She flies because she is free, Frank," she replied, taking his hand. "And she flies because she knows she'll always have solid ground to land on: the love of her 2 grandparents." Avery finished her dance with a spectacular spin and ran toward them, hugging them both at the same time. The girl who once cleaned chimneys to buy a silk dress was now dancing in paradise, proving that when sacrifice meets generosity, life always blooms stronger than ever. And so, between cups of tea and kept promises true, wealth found its permanent place in the hearts of those who knew how to see beyond appearances. In a new twist, Evelyn started a community program inspired by Avery's spirit, teaching kids in the neighborhood about gardening and dance, blending her wealth with local traditions like summer block parties and 4th of July celebrations. Frank shared his landscaping wisdom at these events, and Avery led dance workshops, turning their story into a beacon of hope for others facing hardships. If you also believe that family is much more valuable than money, Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help us keep bringing you exciting news stories. See you in the next story.